Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reference Point. I'm your host, Dave Kocharhook, and welcome back to a second conversation that deals with the subject of Alzheimer's. We talked last time about this challenging disease and the impact that it has on individuals and on families, and how it is becoming more prevalent here in the U.S., and that we need more funding to help figure out what it's all about and how to resolve that challenge. And back with me again this evening are Betty MacDonald and Dave Morley. Folks, thank you for sticking around to do another show. We greatly appreciate this, because we didn't really get to cover everything we needed to talk about, did we?
We didn't, no.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, and Betty, you had shown me something that you had brought with you, that this little flyer, that's the 10 signs, know the 10 signs of Alzheimer's or whatever. I didn't even know about that. Could you want to give us a little?
Well, I could read them off to you.
You could do that. How cool is that?
1, memory loss that disrupts daily life. 2, challenges in planning and problem solving. 3, difficulty completing familiar tasks. 4, confusion with time and space. 5, trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. 6, new problems with words in speaking or writing. 7, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. 8, decreased or poor judgment. 9, withdrawal from work or social activities. And 10, changes in mood and personality.
Are these 10 things something that every Alzheimer patient experiences, goes through? I mean, is it a progression of things, or is it?
I'd say some have 1 or 2 or 3 of these, some have 5 of them. Probably not everybody. The saying is, if you've seen one Alzheimer's patient, you've seen one Alzheimer's patient.
Ah.
And as the brain shrinks, you don't know where it's shrinking.
What's going to be impacted
and
next.
what's going to be impacted.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, everybody's different. And it makes it very difficult to deal with.
One of the things that we had briefly chatted about previously, and I want to touch on now, is the thing that you, Dave, I think you used the term wandering.
Right. Roughly 2/3 of the people wander. And wandering just doesn't mean walking out the door and leaving. It means if a person uses a walker, they leave the walker behind, and they're hell-bent for leather. They're gone. You know, they're walking. If you were walking with them, you would have difficulty keeping up with them.
Wow.
Because they have in their mind that they have to go somewhere, and they don't really know, nobody knows where, but they are gone. And so by the time you realize that they're gone, they could be 2 or 3 or 4 blocks away. And so it's very important, first of all, that you wear some kind of identification bracelet to identify who the person is. They're called medical alert bracelets.
The Alzheimer's Association is a partner with Medical Alert in that program.
And you know, one of the spouses in our support group, they were at a party, and she just decided to walk home. Well, home was a long way away. And he realized that his wife was leaving, and he had a hard time keeping up with her.
Wow. Wow.
And it's very scary.
It's how people get lost when you hear that somebody is
Luckily, my
missing.
wife did not, but that's, you know.
Did your husband?
No, he did not. I was very fortunate.
Yeah.
And some Alzheimer's patients are up in the middle of the night, walking around the house, rooting around, moving things. I was very fortunate that my husband did not have that behavior either.
Got it. The one that was interesting to me when you were reading that was something that I remember when Tiffany was on my show a couple years ago, had to do with the spatial recognition or whatever. That's very interesting.
Well, it's like the map, when Bonnie couldn't read the map anymore. And you know, so, yeah.
On the mini mental tests that they give people testing their cognitive abilities, one of the things that they do is they have them draw an old-fashioned kind of clock with the hands.
Oh, yeah.
And many Alzheimer's patients cannot do that.
Wow.
Or they'll have them also draw a complex object in 3-dimension, like a copy, a box. And it's a time and space thing. They can't do that either.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted a couple of the things that we had talked about at the end of the last show that we wanted to discuss had to do with family, facilities, and finances. So when you first realized that there was a problem with your spouse, how did you tell your children, or did your children already know?
I was always very open with my sons. My sons were gone out of the house, and I didn't want them to come back and say, Mom, you didn't tell us what's going on with Dad. So I was always very open with them, and John was too, in telling them what was going on. My sons were very supportive of me and the decisions that I made along the way. They said, Mom, Dad's a done deal. He has Alzheimer's. He's going to die of this disease. It's you we're concerned about. It's you we want to have for our children. We want them to have a grandmother. And so whatever you need to do to better take care of yourself and Dad, we're behind you 100%. They were very supportive of me. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes adult children question whether Mom is making the right decision, or they want to get in there and tell them what to do. But my children were very supportive.
It's also very common for people to be in denial. Well, Dad really doesn't have the problem, or Mom doesn't really have the problem.
You're just making more than you should be.
Yeah.
And so the children some children can blame the spouse that doesn't have the disease. And so it really can cause major, serious problems in families. And denial is very common.
Is it denial from the patient, or is it denial from the family member, or some of both?
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Denial can happen everywhere. Luckily, when my wife was diagnosed, we went to church the next Sunday, and she went up to her friends and she says, I've just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. That's not common. That the percentage we've heard is 90% of the people are in denial. And that means that if you're in denial, then you don't get a diagnosis. And it's very important to get an early diagnosis, because then you can deal with it. I could then understand what was the problem with my wife, and I could help her.
Got it.
And sometimes, if you don't get a diagnosis, I mean, there are rarely, but there are some diagnoses that are curable. Like vitamin B12,
Right.
and so you fix it.
Right. And we talked about that the other show. When you look at this umbrella thing called dementia,
Yes.
there are certain types that do have a physiological element that is correctable,
Yes.
and then a high percentage
That's
that
right.
is not. And so, okay, I can see that. So you had mentioned also, Dave, that we talked. I know that both of you have participated in a support group
Right.
from the caregiver, but you had said something about there being support groups for those who are afflicted.
Oh, yes. Yes.
When they're in the early stages.
they're
in the early stages.
Okay.
And there's support groups for family members. So it doesn't always have to be a spouse. But yeah, I mean, our spouses went to the same support group so they could talk about their frustrations. I've lost my keys, I couldn't find them. I forget people's names and so on. And so
I can't drive.
I
My
can't
wife doesn't
drive.
want me to drive anymore. I don't want to lose my independence. Why should I give up the car?
My spouse is bossing me around. That's
They're
typical.
so bossy, yeah.
So my spouse is a boss, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's tough.
I mean, you think how my husband was very intuitive about what was going on with him. And he would talk about how he felt like his brain was turning to mush. And he knew what was going on. And he was very sensitive to that. And talked openly about how he felt about it. And think how it does feel when you know that something's wrong with you, that you're not thinking right, you can't remember that word, you can't remember where you've placed anything, you don't know what you had for breakfast, you don't know what you're going to do, you're following your caregiver around the house because you're so insecure. Think how that feels.
Yeah.
You know, it would be very, very difficult to go through this. And some people go through it quite mellow, and other people go through it kicking and screaming and having a lot of behavioral issues.
I believe it, and I can see that's where having some kind of a support group can help.
Oh gosh, we learned so much, and in a support group, in our caregiver support group, some of the things we learned were scary that hadn't happened to our spouse. But then when they did happen to our spouse, we remembered, well, this person handled it in this way. Let me try that.
Yeah.
And so it somewhat prepares you for the future.
Right.
And so you can better deal with things that are going to happen or that do happen.
So facilities is another area to discuss, I think, because the numbers that you had mentioned earlier of was 5.4, I think, million people who are afflicted with it right now, and the expectations are by, was it 2020?
13 by 2050,
2050
by 13 million.
That's a lot of people.
Scary.
And when you look at the and I'm guessing that to a certain degree your major population centers have the higher numbers of people because that's where most of the people are located. Okay. And so what about the facility situation? When we look at the 5.4 million people who are afflicted, and what percentage do you think the family has made a decision to help them by putting them into a facility? And are there enough facilities around?
Well, most people are actually cared for probably at home.
Most are at home because they don't have the funds.
They don't have the money.
They don't have the funding. And that's where we get into the long-term care insurance. But, and that's very difficult to care for someone at home. But some people do and like to do that because that's their calling.
Right. But I'm getting the impression that there's a lot of people, from what you said, that a lot of people have no alternative.
They don't have an alternative. And and that creates a huge amount of stress in that caregiver. And they may have to bring in someone to help, and it ends up that they're going to pay almost as much as placing them. Because it costs a lot of money to bring somebody in for 24 hours, just one person to deal with.
Yeah.
At a facility, there's 58 people where my wife is. There's 58 people there, and there's caregivers of maybe 6 to 8, 10 caregivers. So it's not a one-to-one situation like it would be at home.
So are there enough facilities now for those who could opt to put their person in a facility? Is there enough?
I think there probably are. There's a new one that we just learned of that was opening in Santa Cruz. There are others that are switching, adding memory care units.
To the senior residence
facilities.
Most senior residence facilities now do have a memory care unit. They realize the criticalness of this situation.
Right.
So.
I chose to put my wife, as did Betty, put John, in a facility that is focused on dementia. Because then all of the caregivers are trained in dementia. And so they can then handle situations as they come up. Not necessarily one that has been trained in assisted living and also in memory care.
Right.
And so.
Okay. Interesting. So the Alzheimer's Association has an event every year. I know this because a quartet that I used to sing with would sing at the event down in walking through San Jose.
Right.
And it's in October.
Right.
Yes.
We heard you.
Yeah. Very cool. And So I'm guessing that this is something that's done all over the country?
All over the country.
All over the country and all over the Bay Area. There's, I don't know,
Is
10 different walks or so in the Bay Area alone.
And I know it's in October, and I believe this October it happens to be on a weekend when I'm committed,
And I'm committed to also
to another activity. But it was real interesting to participate in that.
Yes.
I mean, I was only on the fringes. Okay. I was there, and me and these other three guys, and we were singing, and we were having a good time, and it just felt right. I was really glad to be able to do that. So when we talk about people like me who are beginning to understand that there's a challenge that that maybe, God willing, I don't have to deal with personally,
Right.
but it's going to impact me because it has impact socially, financially, economically, politically. It has all. What should I be thinking about? What should I do? What should John and Jane Q Public out there be thinking
Donate
about?
to the Alzheimer's Association for the research programs that they fund, and for the other work that they do in helping caregivers take care of people, and the advice and things that the Alzheimer's Association provides.
And then exercise yourself to
try to
keep yourself physically able and capable. But yeah, the main thing, we have to find a cure. I mean,
There are no survivors of Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, that's
yet.
You've seen that ad recently that said, we're still looking for the first
survivor. Yeah. I want to remind the folks at home that for what we've been talking about on this show and the previous episode, that if you have any questions for Betty and Dave, please send them in, info@referencepointtv.com. We'll get the questions to them, they'll get the answers, and we'll get them back to you, and then we'll see what we can do there. So let's talk about, I really want to go back into this. I know this could be a sensitive area, but I want to talk about the family members. I mean, the children. And you had mentioned something, Betty, earlier about someone that you had met through the support group that you guys have been affiliated with, where the woman's husband was, I think it was
an early onset case.
Yeah, an early onset.
He was
case.
diagnosed with Alzheimer's at age 52. And he still had young children at home. In fact, the children were 6 and 8.
He was an emergency room doctor.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
Alzheimer's is an equal opportunity disease. It takes the best and the brightest as well. And so those children who are now in college, and their father died while they were in high school, they never had a normal disease-free father.
Do you know if they understood what was going on?
Oh, heavens, yes. They were both very involved in his care and visiting him, and actually also the Alzheimer's Association. One of the daughters gave a speech at the Walk in San Jose. They were very involved.
Nice.
And they're not the only. Joanne and her husband, too, her kids were young when when he was diagnosed. So it's a real issue in terms of these early diagnosis cases, because they never know their parent without being diseased.
Being challenged like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So facilities, finances, family. Those were the three key things to talk about
We
in
can
this
talk
show.
about finances you kind of asked earlier about the decision-making process too.
Right.
For me, the decision was, I had to make the decision to place my wife. However, it was a very emotional decision, but it wasn't a financial decision because I had long-term care insurance. But it was a first decision. I mean, we had been married for 45, 46 years, and my wife and I made all decisions together.
Mm-hmm.
This decision I had to make without her, and it was totally my decision. And it was.
Did you talk to your children about it?
I to some extent, but I couldn't really. I mean, I had to make it. I mean, it was me that was being affected, and so we did have a family conference with Tiffany. Tiffany called together a family conference where she explained why it was necessary to place their mother, and I had pretty well made the decision at that time, but she then confirmed it to my children and the wives.
And were they okay with that?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess
they've been supportive.
The way that I asked the question was a little bit little odd. I realize that, but I mean, I guess what I meant to say was the information that they were presented with, did it give them enough of an understanding that it made sense to make this decision?
Yeah. And it was, and the way Tiffany presented it was, first of all, their father was having health problems due to stress, and placing Bonnie is really good for Bonnie because then she will be in a position where she'll have socialization, she'll be amongst her peers. She can talk to her friends and have conversations that you and I would never understand what they're talking about.
It's amazing.
But they talk back and forth.
Yeah,
they do.
They interact with each other.
They do. They interact with each other, and you know, you're kind of listening to this conversation. You have no idea what they're talking about, but there are hand motions and everything, and then there's always caregivers around to help out, and so Tiffany explained to my children that it's really better for both of their parents to place. And so,
when it comes to placement, there are generally three things that are considered. First of all, everybody usually has it, well, when they do this, I'll place them.
Oh.
And for many people, it's when they become incontinent, I'll place them, because I don't want to deal with that. The second thing is safety. You know, the escaping from the house, if the house is a two-story house, and then the person is having trouble walking and seeing, and if the person is up in the middle of the night, there's all kinds of safety issues in the home. Turning on the stove, all these kinds of safety issues. That's a second thing, when it becomes unsafe for the person with the disease. And the last, and probably the most important, is when the caregiver is feeling the need to be relieved from the stress that they're dealing with. And in my case, too, I was having stress attacks and panic attacks, and I was going to the doctor, and I was really beginning to fall apart. And emotionally, I really needed to place my husband and be relieved of the day-to-day challenges that occur in taking someone with
and then you can turn around and be a wife.
That's right.
And I can turn around and be a husband again and go in and take care of them in the facility. And you know.
I suspect that most people who have not had that experience can't quite wrap their wits around it.
Right.
That's correct. And it's hard for people to understand.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. One of the things that an Alzheimer's patient does is that they follow their main caregiver. And so my husband was following me everywhere.
Considering everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And I could never get away from his need to be with me. And it was very challenging. To say the least.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
How do animals fit into the thing for people with Alzheimer's?
That's a good question. As soon as my wife was diagnosed, I went to the Humane Society and said, I want a small animal that can be a companion and a comfort. And I got a little Shih Tzu, and I still have him. And he sat on Bonnie's lap, and she petted him, and very calming. And in fact, now my dog is a, quote, a furry friend. So there's an organization in this area called Furry Friends. And we take a group of these animals to the facility where my wife is, and we just pass them around.
Oh, wow.
And it's we're doing it in a couple days.
Oh, how cool is that? That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they can be very calming and comforting, especially many times people just can hold this animal and you know, the animal doesn't, my animal doesn't care. I mean, you can do anything you want to him.
Hug me. I like it.
Yeah, I
like
love it, exactly, hug me.
Yeah. And what about one of the things you mentioned when you were reading the list of the 10 things was short-term memory loss, I guess. So, but the longer-term memory things that they used to enjoy doing, whether it's dancing or singing or playing the piano or whatever.
The interesting thing is that the short-term memory stops being recorded, but the long-term memory is usually still there. And one of the last things to go in an Alzheimer's patient is music.
Oh.
So when I visited my wife today, not only did I walk with her and everything, but she has a pair of earphones. And so as I was leaving, I put the earphones on and playing some of her favorite music. And she started bouncing around. And so she loves music. And so this is great.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I hope that the folks at home have been internalizing what we've been talking about, that they've been taking this in, because what we've been talking about here in this show and the previous one that we did is a subject matter that's hugely important because of the fact that it's going to affect all of us one way, shape, or form, either directly or tangentially. And so I appreciate the fact that the two of you came to do this. I thank you for presenting the information about the association. I mean, like I said, I've known of the association, but that's about it. And thank you for the work that you're doing with the association, because I think down the road for my children, my grandchildren,
Yes.
okay, and
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
So and I hope that folks, you at home, are thinking about this sort of thing too, because it's not just you, it's not just your spouse, it's going to be your family, everyone in your family, and the potential impact is huge. And one of the other things we talked about was that we have the number of from the boomer generation that are aging out to 65 or beyond, and that seems to be a time slot when people start to demonstrate some of these characteristics. It may have, been percolating for 10 years, but now it is present. So, that it's something you got to think about. So, ladies and gentlemen, pay attention, do something about that. Contact the Alzheimer's Association, see what you can do to help. So, Betty, Dave, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your coming. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next time at Reference Point.